So I'm going to throw it open to the audience. We're going to take questions in threes. I don't mind statements, but please make them short, otherwise I will cut you off. So, or I'll give you a 30-second warning. Please feel welcome to make statements, but keep them concise, and we'll take questions in threes. And you can be provocative, but be respectful.
I've got a question for Linda. Do you not feel, though, that the higher echelons of particularly academia, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, is really a generational thing? Do you not think that in 20 years' time you're going to see fewer men there and many more women?
I think it's going to be quite a long time before that's achieved. And I do think that the problem is, for women, that I would agree with Angela here. I actually think it's quite hard to have it all. But the way that women will achieve that is if we have some kind of revolution in childcare and women actually don't have to look after their own kids. But to be a senior academic, you have to do the papers, you have to apply for the projects, you have to bring the money in. And if you have time out, you lose that. So women who are prepared to kind of make that sacrifice will get there if they push themselves. But men don't have to make that choice.
Okay, gentleman there. Behind you, but you can come in the next round.
Hi, I have a question which is, wouldn't it suggest with the gender pay gap that women, if anything, are losers financially? So men wouldn't be the losers because women are losing financially because of the gender pay gap that we currently have, which is a problem.
Okay, and lady with the glasses.
I spent best part of 10 years waiting to get diagnosed with a chronic medical condition because it was a women's condition, and I recently had to be admitted to hospital, and the only place that I could see a gynecologist was in this, bearing in mind I've got infertility problems, was in the same room as women having miscarriages, the same room as women who were waiting for hysterectomies, and the same room as women and men who were there with children, and I cannot tell you how hard that was. So my question, Angela, is if we are equal, if there is equality and this sisterhood is stop fighting about the little things, what about health? Because I think health's a pretty big thing.
Okay, brilliant. Go on then.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know your name. Katie. Well, first of all, I mean, that sounds pretty traumatic. And I remember when I was fortunate enough to have my own children, I remember hearing stories in the hospital of how the women who had had miscarriages or stillbirths were not far enough away from women who, thank God, had been blessed enough to have children and go to term. I think a lot of incredibly stupid decisions are made by men and women. And it really comes back to my original point. There are a lot of issues with health that concern women that need greater scrutiny, without question. The notion, for example, that my doctor friend here would know far better than I would, the smear test for cervical cancer, there is a cut-off age at which they'll call women, which I think, is it 24, 23?
Yeah.
But if you're sexually active from the age of 17 or whatever age you are, then you run the risk of developing the virus that could lead to cervical cancer. So why have a cut-off age? Some idiot bureaucrat somewhere, some number cruncher, or maybe the fairly legitimate argument about there's only so much money in the pot, has made that arbitrary decision, and somehow, somewhere, there will be women who will fall through the gap and who will suffer consequently. So I think what you're asking me about health and about fighting over the little things, this comes back to my original point. Your traumatic experience is repugnant and awful, and any right-minded person should feel empathy for that. I don't think it takes a man or somebody who hasn't had children to not be able to understand what you must have gone through. Anybody who's in in an environment which is complete anathema to what they're going through, it makes complete sense that they shouldn't be there together. And I would hate to think it's just because you were a woman, or it was just fertility issues, bearing in mind infertility affects 1 in 3 couples now in this country, many of whom, 75% of whom, it's unexplained infertility. That's a matter for all of us, and it comes back to my original point. I think the sooner as we start labelling it as a gender issue, the less chance we have about going about the ways in which we can correct that.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Can I just say, the condition I have affects 1 in 10 women, and I'm not the only one that waited more than that amount of years. It's because it's a women's condition. It's because it's gynecological. The endometriosis just isn't investigated.
You think it's kind of the Cinderella aspect of, and that's not a pun in all seriousness, the Cinderella aspect of healthcare provision and healthcare because it's endometriosis?
No, I think it's because gynecology and obstetrics still will be seen together as women's medicine.
I mean, there's certainly an issue in this country. Sorry, I don't want to hog the mic here.
Got you off it.
Yeah, no, just very quickly. And I was listening to it quite coincidentally. There was an issue about stillbirth on Radio 4 as I was coming in this evening. There is definitely an issue about the pitiful state of reproductive medicine in this country. We read all the time, all about stories about firefighting consultants being brought in last minute because nobody listened to what the mother wanted. Is that a women's issue, though, or is that just poor management on behalf of the health service? Because it takes two, and again, I'm not being flippant, it takes two people to make a baby. And there are, most of the time there might be two parents involved, and that's not just a matter, therefore, for women.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get some
Which question are we at?
agitation
Which
over here.
question are
You
we-
can answer.
Is it the pay
answer
gap?
question.
Was it
And the pay gap, yeah.
Can you remind me of the question?
Yep. If we've still got a gender pay gap, then are women really still the losers?
Do you know, I think, for me, I think, was it Linda mentioned this, is if you earn more, if as a man you earn more and your female colleagues are earning less, that doesn't make you a winner. That, for me, is my argument that they're not evolved. If men think they're the winners for earning more than women because they're men, for me, that backs up my argument. They're not evolving. They're not even getting that. It might be a number. You can do number crunching, but I think it's the mentality, and it feeds into my argument. They're not evolved.
Definitely controversial.
Is it?
Yes,
That's lightweight.
We're all in silence. I think that's controversial. Yeah,
That's not controversial.
Anybody want to challenge on that? No, silence. Oh, yes.
If I was in the same job as a man and he was getting paid more than me, I would have a problem with that.
Yeah, but that's
So-
good.
But in that way,
You're evolved.
Be proud that you're evolved.
yeah. I guess, but I feel like if it sounded like the young man over there was concerned about that, so he's kind of evolved enough to know it's a problem.
Yeah, well, he's here.
Yeah.
That's evolved.
Okay. So sorry. Do you mean
You
that
stand
like
a chance of surviving.
do you mean that if
I don't see them
a man
as
who's getting
winners. I don't see you as a
satisfaction from
winner.
that-
I don't see a man as a winner for earning more money.
Yeah.
In some ways, I see him as a loser because he's less evolved, though he thinks that's okay.
Oh right, if that's what's
Yeah.
satisfying.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. There's a gentleman there with the lovely bouffant hair.
You can't say that to him. You are objectifying him. How very dare you?
The gentleman with the bouffant hair.
There's a man with a fetching shirt over here, but I wouldn't dare say it.
Look, it's International Women's Day. I can say what I like. I'm empowered. I'm evolved.
Go for it.
This is kind of more towards Kate Safe. You took a very interesting perspective of because women are getting much more opportunity and things like that they're winning now. But I think that's just you describing the crumbling of the patriarchy, and surely that's men winning as well because of that.
The lady here with the lovely red hair.
Hello. I think just to summarise, I came here tonight because I think it's really important. I do not think that women have in any way won anything yet, and I think we still got a long way to go. But it's so refreshing to actually come to something which is highlighting that men have not got it easy. I have a male friend who he says he hates himself. He has he's sort of a typical, white straight man who's done a lot of study of feminism, politics, and he has real self-identity issues because he doesn't respect the identity that he has, and he finds it difficult to find male friends who feel the same way and don't just want to talk about football and beer, etc. So I think that I just wondered what you thought about that, about the idea that a lot of men are sort of trapped in that identity and they want more for themselves, but there's no movement for them really, or at least that he can find anyway.
Very good question. Did I see a hand? The gentleman at the end, I did. You have to wait for the mic, otherwise I get dirty looks.
Thank you. Hello. Actually, first of all, I wanted to say, take you to the Women, Happy International Women's Day, and thank you for coming here to talk about us tonight, which I have to say, if it's not talking out of turn, whoever scheduled the events for this festival, I think should have a good hard look at themselves, because this isn't the best day to be having this conversation, I think. That said, since we're here, thank you. I think the discussion, the speakers from the podium raised a couple of interesting points. I think the professor talked about power. She was the only one of the speakers, I think, who mentioned the word power, which is really important, because I think if you ask the question, are men the losers when it comes to power in the world, in society, then no, absolutely no. As you quite rightly observed, men rule everything, they run everything, they've got most of the boardrooms, most of the committees, most of the businesses, most of whatever you want to mention are run by men. When it comes to well-being, which I think what Kate was talking about more, is by no means that clear-cut. And power and well-being and happiness and health and all those things don't necessarily go together. So I think when we're talking about whether men are the losers, you have to be quite clear about what axis or dynamic you're talking about there. Actually, I could go on, but I won't. I'll put it back to see what the panel have to think about that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, Katie, I'm going to go to you. So are men really winning if patriarchy is crumbling?
I'm going to twist that back round again. Is this working? Is it working? Yeah? The question, as I took it, because there's obviously we could spend a month, we could spend all year here discussing the title early. So this is why I decided to take it in the context of the competition, the contest, because I've got a number of different views. It's also very difficult to get those across in 7 minutes. But also in respect of the power and the control, I didn't get a chance to come on to that. So in terms of answering this question, for me, as I say, me personally, I took this in terms of the patriarchal society. When I was talking to the guys today, we did have a number of different discussions about all sorts of different comments. It got very fiery, it got very feisty, and there were some particular things that were said. I stick with the point, for me, that men are the losers, because in the context that I was asking the questions, it was about patriarchal society, it was about gender equality, it was about equity, it was about equal rights, and it was about human rights, and this is something which I didn't get a chance to say earlier. I think that in terms of the patriarchal society, men have lost because women have got these rights. And bearing in mind as well that the guys that I work with, these are guys in prison and who are there, a lot of them, very many of them, for offences against women. So if we're going to talk about domestic violence, if we're going to talk about shootings, if we're going to talk about stabbings, if we're going to talk about all of the social ills, then certainly they have lost, because whereas years ago they may have got away with that, they can't now because the legal framework's in place. And because we have human rights and we've got a whole host of other rights, but we've also got the opportunity that we didn't used to have, and certainly I didn't used to have, back in 1980, 1990, the recourse to the police, the recourse to the courts, the recourse to support services. Things have changed massively. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant, thank you. Linda, you wanted to come in on the question about macho culture and space to
I'd like to comment on that as well.
It goes with both, really. It's about the whole issue of well-being, and I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, there are undoubtedly, men are killing themselves at 3 times the rate of women in our society. I don't disagree with that at all. There are men who are suffering. There are men who are finding life very difficult. I think that one of the problems we have, though, is that for those men who are losing out, the power to bring about those changes lies with other men. It lies with men who have the power in our society. As women, we can support them, and we do our best to support them, but we don't have, it is a patriarchal society, and we don't hold the power to be able to, we try to, but to do things like that requires quite a lot of power to change things. And I would like to think, I know that there are a lot of young men dropping out, not going for education, that needs some major policy interventions to be able to change that. And that requires politics, and politics is still a very patriarchal culture.
Can I intervene there?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
but briefly.
Briefly. Are you suggesting I talk a lot?
Not at all, never.
I mean, I respect enormously what Linda has said and agree with a lot of what she says. But what really gets my beef going here is when there is this enduring discussion about something being patriarchal or it's all about men. For goodness sake, America's about to elect its first female president in its history. So, I mean, if that isn't, for better or worse, that's a whole other discussion. Sorry, you want me to speak into the microphone? Okay.
No,
Okay,
she's
carry on.
doing it to me. This is,
She's talking to you?
Yeah.
Okay, this is very
Multi-talented,
confusing.
you
It's
know
like
what I mean?
being on top of the pops.
Come on,
isn't
Andy,
it?
get on with
Okay, yeah. So America, for whatever reason, or about to, they're on the brink of electing a female president, first time in its history. If that isn't emancipation of women, what is? This constant discussion about there aren't enough women at the top. I do not think that this is, that we can say with a broad brush it's because women don't have the opportunity. We have babies and we have very different bodies. I am not trying to patronise, but anybody who has been through that experience or has been pregnant or has been trying to have a baby will tell you, you become a complete chemical, hormonal nightmare. Okay? You become somebody different, and when you do have children, suddenly your body is not your own. And some of the things you may think you wanted in the past may not still be those things. Linda, said very candidly, she chose her career. She realised that she couldn't achieve what she wanted to do as well as have children. So therefore, to suggest that it's all about because men are at the top, that's why women aren't having the opportunities. Some of them, it comes back to my original point, don't want it. They may mentally want it, but when it comes to it, physically or psychologically, they don't want it anymore.
Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I'd like to come back. I feel that was very relevant to what I was talking about. I think when you're not kind of operating, can you hear me? Yeah. When you're not operating on a kind of macho kind of world, when you're kind of turning against that, and you've kind of gone against the tide as a man, I feel like I'm a minority, and for years, me and my minorities were going against the tide. And I think I feel powerful now, but I didn't always feel powerful. I probably felt very much isolated. Back in the days, I'd never even heard of a transgender person when I was growing up. I made a joke that in the 1970s, nobody knew what being transgender was, and that my family was still getting their head round Findus crispy pancakes. It literally wasn't happening. And I think it's taken years, and to go against the tide does take a bit of courage. But I think your friend, the people like your friend, are the ones that need to turn that ship around and help men evolve. Because what you said is what I was saying in my arguments. I think they are becoming evolutionary weak because they're not able to express themselves or to go against the tide, whereas queers have had to go against the tide all the time, and now we're quite strong. And I think that kind of feeds into what I was saying. So I think they have to be brave, and it takes time. Sadly, it takes time.
Okay, we're going to take another round of questions. Young lady there, young woman at the back, and lady with a black jumper arm. I can see a black arm. Yeah.
Hiya.
Hi.
Can I just say I was very surprised by the arguments for, I keep getting confused, for the motion, in a good way, because it was kind of like women are great and strong and therefore men are the losers, which I thought was brilliant. And I really like your argument about men being less evolved. But I think something that hasn't really been touched upon that much is violence against women, apart from Linda, who touched upon it briefly, but I feel like the focus was on the Pakistani community, which I think was a little bit reductive. And I feel like that's a really pertinent issue, especially nowadays with the news. The first thing I read this morning when I woke up on International Women's Day was that women are being urged by Greater Manchester Police not to leave their house at night time alone due to men assaulting women on the streets. And I feel like, we're talking about a lot about women being at the top in terms of companies and money and earning enough money, but women are still being assaulted on a daily basis, sexually, physically, in their homes, on the street, and I think that's an issue that we need to be talking about a little bit more in this debate.
Thank you very much. The lady at the back with the glasses on. Yes, you.
Hi. I kind of take exception to this argument about men not being
evolved. I think it's insulting, and I think it's probably quite harmful. I don't know what your kind of rationale is. Are you saying that people that don't agree with a certain lifestyle are less evolved? What are you saying?
Yeah.
Wait. Oh, wait. Go, jump again.
It's not a lifestyle.
Just said wait.
Sorry.
Okay, there's a okay, lady there, and then we're going to do it in 4 because Angelique is messing my system up.
Me again?
We can't see you at all. No, you again. Okay.
Oh, God.
That's
I'll
not
do a
yeah,
twirl.
that's not fair.
You can do a catwalk.
Brief. You need to keep it brief. You've already spoken. If I'd known it was you again, I wouldn't have let you speak.
She's a bricklayer.
I have to be
don't
honest,
argue
so
it.
far, I came in a bit late, so I can't see terribly well from here. I sit with Linda and with Kate. I think your idea that there's going to be a female president is far-fetched at this moment in time. I laughed at that point, I'll be honest with you, because America itself sits there and says, we'll happily welcome in a black guy, but it took us 40, 50 years to get there. A woman president? Have you seen what's going on out there? Seriously, with Trump, etc. It's a joke. Sorry, I'm going off point, aren't I?
Yeah, I knew you're rapidly losing time.
But what I wanted to ask really was, or rather pick up upon the point of, was you were talking before about domestic violence, and specifically you referred to mostly, men being in prison with regard to physical violence. I think it goes much further than that, and I think that you're going to see in the next few years, obviously an increasing amount of women going in. But I think that it's changing now as violence becomes unacceptable, and it is consciously seen as being unacceptable. It moves on to something more insidious, which is financial, emotional, and that kind of abuse. And I think that the male population will actually drop. So is it just a male thing, do you think?
Okay. We're going to have the lady over there who was my original third person, but thank you for that.
Hi, it's a bit of a statement rather than a question, but I think Linda touched upon this a little bit, that a lot of the conversations we're having here are particularly white, privileged conversation to be having. My family's grown up in India. I've grown up in an Indian community here, and a lot of this stuff about women having got that stage of equality, it's not the case in the vast majority of cases. And I think we need to widen the conversation when we're talking about whether men are the losers now, not just about our immediate experiences of it as people who are quite clued up about this, but as 7 billion people in the world, actually, how equal are we?
I fully agree with that, as somebody goes on about white, middle-class, female privilege. Anyway, we shall get back to the subject matter, which is, we're going to touch on, we haven't really spoken about women against violence, and it's already been pointed out that 2 women are still killed a week. That has been consistent for a very long time. Can we really argue that that men are the losers in that case? I'm putting it to you too.
I mean, for me, men are the losers.
Yeah, but
men are the losers. Men are still the losers. Just because you beat women up, it doesn't mean you're the winner. They are the losers for beating women up.
Okay, so for me on that, I've actually been working in, as I say, criminal and justice services across the board, different types of provision for 23 years. That includes women's refuges, homeless families, women's hostels, women's mental health units, women's prisons, the list goes on. Again, I'm limited for time and I don't want to hog for time. Oh, sorry, I don't want to hog for time either. Again, what I will say is that I have seen in the time, as I say, I'm only 40, I think I said I was 41, I'm 42, I can't remember.
Just had a birthday when we were looking.
Just even in the time that I've been around, even in the time that I've been working, I've seen some massive changes. I've seen massive changes to practices, I've seen massive changes to policies, procedures, support services, I've seen where things have developed, I've seen a whole host of different things, and those things were not in place years ago. However, I do accept that there's not enough of those, that domestic violence is still incredibly prevalent. There's an awful lot of violence that goes on in respect of women, also in respect of girls. I also think, you know, in terms of the gang cultures, going back to your point earlier as well, if we can cover that one as well, I've seen massive changes in terms of the women's estate, because as we're getting into that flick of gender equality and girls are just as good as boys, women obviously are fighting back. But then the impact of that, whether it's female domestic violence, we've also not acknowledged here same-sex domestic violence. There is still quite a number of taboos that people don't talk about. But equally, I've worked with, again in that time, I'm not really keen on the word victim, but male victim survivors of domestic violence. I've also, you know, feel very passionately about this, but I was also made aware that the audience was for those that were 12 plus. So, you know, I'm conscious of that. I know and I understand that domestic violence encompasses a whole host of different things. I know it's psychological, it's sexual, it's financial. The list goes on. However, the point that I'm making is that years ago, women didn't have those rights. Women have got those rights. Women have got the opportunity to take actions now. I'm not saying it goes far enough, because I don't think it does. But within that as well, and in terms of the prison estate, in terms of criminal justice, you know, we're not just talking about domestic violence anymore. We're also talking about trafficking. There's an awful lot of things that are going on which, you know, we haven't had the chance really to acknowledge here. But within that, I also acknowledge that men equally have issues as women do. So I wouldn't say, obviously, that domestic violence is just about women. You know, I also think that it needs to be said that domestic violence also affects children. That, you know, we haven't touched on the aspects of children, and we also have to think about how that impacts on our boys as well as our girls, as well as other family members.
Thank you. Linda, I'm going to ask you to come in on that, as well as the second question about physical violence and is it going to be reduced?
I think we just have to think about the world outside this room. And when I started training as a doctor, I had no idea how much sexual abuse there was in this world. People just didn't talk about it. Now I talk to my colleagues, and one of my colleagues last week, I think something like 3 people had disclosed sexual abuse to her that morning in one clinic. Women experience that in the home from men at 3 times the rate. Physical violence, it's about equal, girls and boys from their parents. It has an enormous impact on them. Domestic violence is, yes, I have had patients that get beaten up by their wives and the police are not that helpful, but I'm afraid the majority, it's men that do it. I think the issue about safety in the streets is really important too. It's about women actually feeling afraid, particularly if you live in an area like, you know, a really deprived area. You suffer all of these things. And maybe I spent 10 years working in Salford, and years before that I worked in Barnsley. And I've worked in those areas, and I've worked with those women. So I think we have to think about the big things and the bigger picture. And the point about ethnic minorities, I think, is well made. I am not someone who gets fussed about whether someone opens the door for me or not. I'm more fussed about whether people are still being beaten up and whether we're actually doing something about the big things that are happening to women.
Wait. And it was about to jump in then. Can I ask another question and then?
You're the chairman, you must... Sorry, you're the chairperson. You must
I don't mind being called
answer.
chairman. I'm quite, you know, you can call me whatever you like. I'll answer to most things. I'm going to... I want to ask the panel, all 4 of you, a question actually about what you've just touched on. And that is this about checking your privilege? You know, we're talking about very white, very middle class, very gender-specific issues. And the young lady in the corner said, you know, we're talking about 7 billion people in the world who live in severe inequality. Actually, should we be having a different type of discussion? I'm going to work this way down. Actually, Angela, I'm going to start with you. You need to check your privilege.
I need to check how this thing works. I love the fact we've got 4 empowered people up here and none of us know how to use the microphone.
I do.
Sorry. past 5. I said 4. Privilege. What is privilege? I mean, okay, we are talking about this in this country, all right? There's a massive discussion about the issues of how ethnicity and different cultures view women. That's a huge conversation, and there are so many different dynamics to that. That's not to suggest it's not perfect or not important. Privilege, I don't see myself as privileged. I was born in this country. My grandparents, I'm Jewish, my grandparents came to this country at the turn of the century to escape from persecution in Russia. I have friends and family who lost relatives during the Holocaust. They were murdered because they were Jewish. We have terrible anti-Semitism in this country. Well, there are so many different things that different ethnic dynamics and different ethnic groups could talk about. There's abuse and there are difficulties in all different aspects of different communities. I have a friend that works for a women's refuge organisation, and she has the wives of judges who come there and people that are married to so-called privileged people and who would be perceived to be living a privileged life just because you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant who had a decent education. That doesn't always smack of privilege if the other things in your life are all falling apart. I think what we haven't touched upon is the way family life has become dysfunctional in this country. And I'm a firm believer that without the bedrock of a stable family life, children that are brought up by parents who respect each other and respect their children, who teach you and teach their children and their peers how to be considerate of one another, how it is important to speak to one another, then lots of the different social issues that stem from the discussions we've had this evening all sprout from the fact that there are feckless situations where women become pregnant by some cavalier one-night stander and she never sees him again and she can't ever pin down who, etc., etc. We have lost the ability to be a stable, functional family dynamic in this country. There's an awful lot of that, and I think a lot of the problems do stem from that, and we have to look at that before we look at the other things that come from it.
Do you need to check your privilege? I'm asking all of you. I think we all did. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
go on.
no, go on.
Hang on.
For me, it just when I was there, it reminds me, is it Animal Farm when they said we are all equal, except some of us are more equal than others. I think privilege is so big. I think we're all privileged, but some of us are more privileged than others. I really believe that.
Linda? I'll come back to you.
I think I'm fortunate. I wouldn't describe myself as privileged. I think I'm fortunate. I'm awfully glad I'm not living in a refugee camp in Greece. I worked hard to get where I am. I put an awful lot of work into that. So I wouldn't describe myself as privileged. A lot has gone into it. But when I look at the situation of some people in the world, I'm just awfully glad I'm not there.
I think the only thing that I can say is my view is exactly as Linda's. And you're also waving rather the boxes at me, but I do completely agree with what Linda's saying.
Okay, but before we go to the ballot boxes, I just want Kate to come back to that question, which was, is it actually harmful and offensive to say that men are not evolved?
Okay, thank you for letting me come back. I think for me, I used evolved as a hook. We had 7 minutes. I wanted to capture your imagination and get that concept of evolved. And I do believe that we have to evolve as the world changes. And if you don't evolve, you will become weak. And also, being queer is not a lifestyle. Living by the sea and gardening are a lifestyle. Just because you referred to being queer as a lifestyle, that's very dismissive. And also, if you're a majority, I was saying that sometimes, most of the time, you don't have to understand minorities. That's the point I was making. There's a privilege in that. And also how a society treats its minorities shows how evolved that society is. It's very telling. If you want to check how a society is doing, check how it's treating its minorities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, so without further ado, at the straw poll, we said that for the motion, we had 12%. Against the motion, 48 of you thought that men are not the losers. 27% were undecided, and the special category, everyone loses in a patriarchy, it was 13%. Unfortunately, we didn't predict that, so we didn't have a ballot for that. So I'm going to give you, as the discussed Chief Returning Officer, all the votes have been counted, and we have, for the motion, 18%, against the motion, 82%. So the motion has been lost.